holes that we identified in the piece really have to do with contradictions between what Secretary of State Kerry has said in his public announcements and what other partners, if you use that phrase, in the Syrian issue have also reported. And basically what we identified is that when it came to questions of the efficacy of a UN investigation or the number of people killed in the conflict, or even the U.S. rendition of what happened in what order, there are contradictions. Do they completely undercut the case? I don't know. If you believe that conclusions are based on facts, then the question becomes, do we have the facts? And that's, that's an issue.
So take us through these issues one by one. Talk, for example, about the numbers. The number that Senator Kerry, Secretary of State Kerry, has referenced. How did the U.S. reach that tally of 1,429 people killed in a gas attack, including 426 children?
Well, we actually don't know how they obtained that number. It is the highest number that's reported by anyone. 1,429. It's a very precise number. The U.S. intelligence summary doesn't tell us how they arrived at it. It's interesting because it is so much higher than even what the local coordinating committees, which is the Syrian opposition group on the ground, reports, and they reported 1,252. Again, a precise number, but much lower than the U.S. number. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is generally considered the most authoritative source for violence in Syria, they've figured about 502, maybe 100 children, some number of rebel fighters in that number. The French, who have been the most transparent about how they arrived at a number, have reported 281. The French looked at 47 videos, according to their intelligence summary, and they counted the bodies in them. So, of course, they say it's quite likely that there were more than 281 people killed, but at least we know where their precise number came from.
So why do you think it is that we have no idea that how the U.S. obtained this figure?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, it seems to me simple enough to say we got it from X source. I don't know why we don't have that sort of information. Kerry has not taken questions from the news media on that, and it didn't come up in yesterday's hearing. Because I think most people are generally unaware that the numbers are all over the map, and you can say, well, what's the difference, whether it was 1,400 or 200. But I think it probably makes a difference in understanding, was this the largest chemical weapons assault, or was it a middling chemical weapons assault? What do we really know about the assault? And those are questions we ought to at least know the answers to as we conclude what our response is going to be. And one of the bigger issues for me was the immediacy with which the administration denounced a UN investigation into the probe. I mean, even before the investigation had begun, the Secretary of State was on TV telling the American people that there'd been a 5-day delay, which he later changed to 4. There'd been a 5-day delay, and that was too long to get any credible evidence. And that was just simply not a true statement. And why they worked so hard to discredit the United Nations investigation even before it had gotten started, is an open question.
We're talking to Mark Seibel, Chief of Correspondence for McClatchy Newspapers. You also raised the question about the proof that a chemical attack happened and the question of who was involved with that.
Excuse me, tell me the question again.
You raised the question in your piece in McClatchy newspapers of the proof that a chemical attack happened and who was responsible for it.
Well, we've been told that a chemical attack took place, and the evidence seems to be that some sort of attack took place. We don't actually know what the chemical was. The U.S. has said that it was sarin. There's every reason to think that might be true, but we don't know what the chemical test was that led them to conclude that it was sarin. We don't know how the evidence was obtained. We don't know what lab it was worked in. We actually don't know how they arrived at that conclusion so quickly. That they announced it Sunday. But according to the Secretary of State, it will take the UN 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks to reach that same determination in very modern labs in Europe. So there's an awful lot we don't know about that. And because we don't know it, because we don't know the details, at least in the public case, and again, we're not sitting in the classified briefings, but we don't really know. We are being asked to, to trust the assertion that it was sarin and that we know that, but here again, we're asked to make a leap of faith.
Let's go to Secretary of State John Kerry, who says that humanitarian organizations working on the ground in Syria corroborated U.S. government claims that chemical weapons had been deployed.
Our understanding of what has already happened in Syria is grounded in facts, informed by conscience, and guided by common sense. The reported number of victims, the reported symptoms of those who were killed or injured, the first-hand accounts from humanitarian organizations on the ground, like Doctors Without Borders and the Syria Human Rights Commission. These all strongly indicate that everything these images are already screaming at us is real, that chemical weapons were used in Syria.
Secretary of State Kerry speaking last week. Now, Doctors Without Borders, which also goes by its French acronym MSF for Médecins Sans Frontières, posted a statement on its website saying, quote, MSF is aware that incorrect, manipulated information about MSF in Syria is circulating on the internet and social media. MSF does not have the capacity to identify the cause of the neurotoxic symptoms of patients reported by 3 clinics supplied by MSF in Damascus. Government. MSF does not possess the capacity or ability to determine or assign responsibility for the event that caused these reported symptoms to occur. Any statement or story that asserts any of these things is false. Mark Seibel, if you could respond to what MSF and the Secretary of State, John Kerry, is saying.
Well, one of the things that I think in terms of Doctors Without Borders is that the Secretary of State talks about it as firsthand observation by Doctors Without Borders. And Doctors Without Borders has been very clear that it's too dangerous for their people to actually go in there. So it is not Doctors Without Borders firsthand observation. What Doctors Without Borders does have is information from Syrian medical personnel that they have worked with previously and that they have provided supplies to. And they reported, what they were told by those doctors at 3 hospitals, that they had treated 3,600 patients who showed various symptoms, and that 355 of those patients had died. But I think to say it was a firsthand observation, it's not a firsthand observation. The information may be perfectly valid, but we don't know that. And so here again, it's does it undercut the full case? I don't know. Does it support the full case? I don't know. What it does say is that what we're being told publicly is not exactly what other people are saying.
But another problem that you raise, an issue that you raise in your article, is that if the U.S. knew through intelligence sources, as Kerry claimed last week, that the Assad regime was preparing to launch chemical weapons attacks 3 days before the attacks occurred, why didn't the U.S. warn the opposition that these attacks were coming?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and it gets at something that we have learned since the piece ran, because the presentation that has been made over the last several days leads you to believe that, well, we saw them getting ready for a chemical attack. We saw the rockets launched, and then there was a chemical attack. It turns out, and we've learned subsequent to writing this piece, that that's not how it worked at all. There was the chemical attack, and then apparently the U.S. began processing intelligence that it had picked up or information it had gotten previously, and determined, oh, in here we have seen some signs that they were putting on gas masks or mixing chemicals or whatever. But we didn't actually pick that information up before the attack. So here again, it's in the presentation of the information, we have been given a timeline that does not actually reflect what the process by which we have, quote unquote, learned what took place. It struck a lot of the Syrian opposition as wrong that the United States would have seen preparations for a chemical attack and not bothered to say anything. And we know last December that when they perceived that there were preparations being made for a chemical attack, that the U.S. made a big fuss about it. Obama redrew his red line. Hillary Clinton made statements. The UN withdrew its personnel from the ground. None of that took place in August. And that had struck the Syrian opposition as odd. You know, why didn't you let us know? But as it turns out, while we're saying now that we detected these preparations, we did not detect those preparations in real time. That's something we've concluded was taking place by looking at things we recovered after we were aware of the attack.